The wind howled across the barren expanse of Xena 9, carrying with it the dust and grit of a planet long forgotten by most of the galaxy. Sergeant Sam Hawkins crouched low behind a jagged outcrop of rock, his rifle resting against the cool stone surface. His eyes were fixed through the scope, tracking the movements of a Galactic Empire patrol down below. They were just a handful of soldiers, arrogant in their confidence, marching like they owned the whole goddamn planet. They didn't know it yet, but Hawkins was about to show them just how wrong they were. He breathed slowly, steadying his heart. Years of experience had taught him how to wait, how to control the urge to act before the perfect moment. Time moved differently when you were perched in a sniper's nest, alone, concealed, waiting for a single shot to change everything. The light of the twin suns dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. Hawkins had been here for hours, tracking the patrol, waiting for the signal. The rest of his team was further back, preparing for the assault. They would move in once the first blow was struck, once Hawkins cleared the path. The Galactic Empire was underestimating humanity. They'd done it for years. To them, humans were nothing more than a nuisance, a primitive species who had stumbled onto the galactic stage, armed with outdated weaponry. The Empire's top brass had laughed when they saw ballistic rifles, real, manual-powered weapons, being deployed in the field. They'd scoffed. Primitive, they called them. Ineffective. They were wrong. Hawkins knew just how effective a single bullet could be, how much damage a well-placed shot could inflict. 6 of them. Hawkins muttered under his breath. He spoke to no one in particular, just a quiet acknowledgement to himself. The Empire soldiers were nearing the choke point. It was time. He adjusted the scope of his rifle, fine-tuning the magnification. His eyes flicked over the target area. Each one of the soldiers was in range. A single shot, that's all it would take to start the chaos. His team was in position, spread out in the rocky terrain, hidden from view. Sergeant Hawkins wasn't worried about them. They were a highly trained unit, ready to move the moment they had an opening. The real challenge lay in making that opening. Go dark, he whispered into his comm. No mistakes. Wait for my signal. A soft click was all he heard in response. Hawkins didn't need more. His team knew their job. Below, the soldiers were still marching, unaware of the sniper's gaze on them. He adjusted the wind dial on his rifle, recalculating the angle. The wind was picking up, but it wasn't enough to shift the trajectory too much. He took a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. The shot was a clean, crisp crack in the silence. A single bullet sped toward its target, cutting through the air with deadly precision. The lead soldier dropped without a sound. The others froze for a split second, their eyes scanning the barren landscape, trying to pinpoint the source of the shot. It was too late. Hawkins was already shifting into position, reloading. He didn't watch them panic. He didn't need to. His focus was on the next target. The soldiers scrambled, their panic mounting as they searched for the sniper who had struck from nowhere. They had no idea what had just happened. Hawkins was already lining up his second shot, slow and methodical. He squeezed the trigger again. Another soldier dropped, lifeless before he even had a chance to react. The Empire forces were in chaos. One moment, they were marching in confident arrogance, believing themselves untouchable. The next, they were being picked off, one, by a single human with a rifle. Hawkins knew the Empire would retaliate soon. They would send a full assault to flush him out, to take him down. But for now, he had the upper hand. In the distance, a low hum echoed across the dry plains, the unmistakable sound of the Empire's ground assault vehicles. Hawkins didn't have much time. They had realized the threat. They were coming for him. His comm crackled to life. "Hawk, we're ready on your mark." "Wait," he responded, his voice steady as always. "They're still too spread out. Wait for the signal." Through the scope, Hawkins tracked the remaining soldiers, their movements becoming erratic as they tried to make sense of the chaos. Panic. Fear. They were out of their depth. Then came the voice, loud and clear over the comms. "General Trask is mobilizing the counter-assault. We have to move now, or we'll be overrun. Not yet, Hawkins snapped. Patience. He adjusted his position, peering through the scope. One more, he muttered. One more and we'll have them scrambling. The final soldier took a few hesitant steps forward, glancing nervously at his comrades who were now scrambling for cover. Hawkins exhaled slowly, lining up the shot. The soldier never saw it coming. A clean shot to the head, and he collapsed to the ground. Clear, Hawkins said, a slight edge of satisfaction creeping into his voice. Roger that, came the response from his team. They were already on the move, advancing as the dust settled. But Hawkins remained behind, crouched low, listening for any signs of retaliation. Moments later, the low hum grew louder, and the ground began to shake as Empire assault tanks rolled across the horizon. Hawkins knew what was coming next. The real battle was about to begin. The Galactic Empire had underestimated humanity. They still didn't realize how dangerous a single sniper could be, how deadly an old weapon could prove when wielded by someone who knew its value. Hawkins was just getting started. The crack of Hawkins' rifle echoed across the barren wasteland, signaling the beginning of the end for the Empire's patrol. His finger remained steady on the trigger, his eyes locked on the scope as the body of the first soldier crumpled to the dirt, lifeless before he even had a chance to scream. Hawkins didn't watch the fall. He didn't need to. He was already shifting to the next target, his body moving fluidly as years of training kicked in. His rifle was an extension of himself, each shot as natural as breathing. The Empire soldiers, for a moment, stood frozen in confusion. They weren't accustomed to this kind of warfare. They dealt with insurgents and rebels, but never with a sniper who could strike from miles away, unseen and unheard. Panic spread like wildfire through the patrol as they began shouting orders, their voices tinged with fear. Hawkins didn't flinch. His eyes scanned the chaos below, picking out the next soldier. The second shot was just as clean. Another soldier dropped with barely a twitch, his face frozen in shock as the bullet tore through his skull. The remaining 4 soldiers began to scramble, ducking behind rocks and debris, trying to find cover. But it was too late. Hawkins had already calculated their movements, already anticipated their next steps. He was always one step ahead. He reloaded the rifle with practiced precision, the familiar click of the bolt sending a jolt of satisfaction through him. 2 down, 4 to go, he muttered to himself, more to steady his thoughts than anything else. He could feel the adrenaline creeping into his veins, the thrill of the hunt building, but he knew better than to let it control him. Calm, controlled, and precise. That's how he operated. The soldiers were moving now, their fear driving them into a frenzy. They thought they were being attacked by multiple snipers, unsure of where the next shot would come from. One soldier, the youngest of the group, darted from his position, clearly trying to get a better angle. He didn't last long. Hawkins didn't need more than a fraction of a second to line up the shot. The bullet was already in the air before the soldier's body hit the ground. 3 down, Hawkins whispered, almost absent-mindedly. His heart rate hadn't changed. He was still methodical, still calculating. His team was on standby, but they wouldn't move until Hawkins cleared the path. He was the first and only line of defense in the opening phase. His comm crackled. Hawk, we're getting too much heat from the tanks. We need to move now. The voice on the other end was sharp, urgent. The heavy hum of the Empire's assault vehicles was unmistakable. The Empire's response was coming faster than Hawkins had anticipated. They were mobilizing a full assault to flush him out. Not yet, Hawkins replied coolly, peering through the scope again. 2 left. He wasn't worried about the tanks. They weren't his concern. His concern was ensuring the patrol was wiped out. 2 more soldiers. 2 more clean shots. That was all it would take. Below him, the soldiers had begun to scatter, their movements becoming more erratic as the fear set in. One soldier tried to make a run for it, desperate to find cover, but Hawkins was already tracking him through the scope. The young soldier's movements were frantic, reckless. He was too slow, too predictable. Hawkins had him lined up before he even reached the cover of a nearby boulder. The shot rang out, and the soldier collapsed mid-stride, his body jerking violently as the bullet tore through him. It was over before he even knew it. The last soldier, the one who had been barking orders, was now alone. Hawkins could see him ducking behind a rusted piece of debris, his eyes wide with panic. The Empire's soldier had finally realized the gravity of the situation. He wasn't going to make it. Hawkins took his time, carefully adjusting the scope to account for the slight wind gusts that had started to pick up. He needed the perfect shot, the final one. His finger hovered over the trigger, steady and unhurried. There was no rush. Not yet. The soldier was in his sights. All Hawkins had to do was wait for him to make the slightest mistake. The soldier's breath was ragged, his hands trembling as he peeked around the corner of the debris. It was then that Hawkins saw the slight shift in his posture, the opening he'd been waiting for. The soldier's head briefly came into view, just for a moment, enough for Hawkins to make the kill. Hawkins squeezed the trigger, the shot echoing across the desolate wasteland. The soldier never saw it coming. His body crumpled to the ground in an instant, his rifle slipping from his hands. The patrol was no more. The wind howled again, but this time it felt different. Hawkins let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding, and a brief flicker of satisfaction ran through him. The battlefield was silent now. The Empire's soldiers, all 6 of them, were dead. The rest of the mission was about to begin. "Hawk, do you copy?" The voice came through his comm again, this time more insistent. It was his team, waiting for the go-ahead. "I copy," Hawkins replied, his voice low and steady. "Move in." The sound of boots crunching on the dusty ground signaled that his team was advancing. They had been waiting for his mark, and now they could move in with minimal resistance. The Empire had no idea what had hit them. They'd been taken down by a single sniper, a human soldier armed with nothing but an old rifle and a deadly aim. Hawkins carefully packed away his rifle, ensuring it was secure as he stood up from his crouch. His eyes scanned the horizon once more. The tanks were getting closer, but they wouldn't matter now. The path was clear. His team would deal with the rest. They had a base to infiltrate, a resistance to support, and an empire to topple. He moved quickly, but his pace was controlled. He knew what was coming. The Empire's retaliation would be swift. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would have to learn the hard way. Hawkins smiled to himself. Let them come. They were about to find out just how deadly a human soldier could be. The silence of the battlefield didn't last long. As soon as Hawkins and his team moved into position, the ground began to shake. The rumble of Empire assault tanks and mechanized infantry units closing in on their position reverberated through the desolate terrain. Hawkins could feel the vibrations through the soles of his boots, the unmistakable sound of overwhelming force on its way. The Empire was angry now, and they were coming with everything they had. 30 seconds, Hawkins muttered, his voice low, but firm as he surveyed the horizon. His eyes were sharp, darting from one point to the next, scanning for movement. The Empire's response would be swift and brutal. He could already hear the low hum of their advanced weapons systems powering up, the telltale signs of elite infantry preparing for a fight. His comm crackled. "Hawk, the tanks are moving in fast. You want us to hold or engage?" Hawkins hesitated only for a moment. They couldn't afford to wait. If they did, they'd be overrun, their mission lost. The Empire had too much firepower at their disposal. They needed to strike first, hit hard, hit fast. "Engage," Hawkins ordered, his voice cold and calculated. "Take out the armor. I've got the infantry." With that, his team sprang into action. They had planned for this, knew what needed to be done. They fanned out across the rocky outcrop, taking up positions behind cover, their weapons raised and ready. Hawkins himself moved to a higher ridge, positioning himself where he could see the approaching tanks. The first tank appeared over the horizon, its massive silhouette cutting a jagged line across the orange sky. It was followed by another, then another, each vehicle bristling with weaponry, making the ground quake with every step. Hawkins scanned them with the same cold precision he'd used in the earlier phase of the mission. The tanks were formidable, but they had a weakness. They relied on a fixed targeting system, and that was something they could exploit. His team, expertly camouflaged, began their assault. Explosions ripped through the air as anti-tank missiles flew toward the Empire's lead vehicle. A direct hit. The first tank lurched violently, smoke pouring from its sides as it went into a violent spin. It crashed into another tank behind it, the two vehicles blocking the path of the rest of the assault force. The infantry was now exposed, caught between the chaos of their shattered armor and the relentless attack of human soldiers. "Nice work," Hawkins muttered, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. But there was no time to bask in it. He had his own job to do. The Empire's infantry soldiers, no longer protected by their tanks, began to scatter. They were good, no question about that. Their training was impeccable. But they were still unprepared for the sheer brutality and unpredictability of human combat tactics. They didn't expect the precise, brutal efficiency with which Hawkins and his team moved. A soldier darted out from behind cover, his blaster raised high, scanning for targets. Hawkins shifted, tracking the movement with practiced ease. In a split second, his rifle was in his hands, and the soldier fell. One shot. That was all it took. The rest of the infantry wasn't much better. They were panicked now, scattering in every direction. Hawkins had them right where he wanted them. He fired again, and another soldier crumpled to the ground, his life extinguished before he even realized what had happened. "Move in!" Hawkins barked into his comm. "Flush them out!" His team obeyed without hesitation. They surged forward, taking the fight directly to the enemy. One of Hawkins' team members, Corporal Miller, launched a grenade at a group of soldiers taking cover behind a rusted transport vehicle. The explosion sent a shockwave through the battlefield, throwing soldiers in every direction. It was chaos now. The Empire's once organized line had completely fallen apart. Through the smoke and confusion, Hawkins picked out another target. A high-ranking officer, judging by the insignia on his uniform, was trying to organize his remaining soldiers. Hawkins grinned to himself. He was a marked man now. His finger tightened on the trigger. The officer didn't see him coming. One shot, and he was down, his body crumpling to the dirt, the soldiers around him scattering like insects. They were losing their grip on the situation fast. "Hawk, we've got more infantry incoming from the north." Miller's voice came over the comm, urgent. "We need to hold the line." Hawkins cursed under his breath. They were being flanked. He couldn't let them regroup. He had to stop them, here, now, before they could pull together another assault. He lifted his rifle and scanned the horizon. A new wave of soldiers was charging toward them, a mix of elite Empire troops and fresh recruits, their bodies moving in tight formations, trying to capitalize on the chaos. They wouldn't last long if they kept that up. Hawkins could see it. The enemy was making the classic mistake of thinking they had time. He took the first shot, and the soldier in the front row fell, his rifle slipping from his hands as he hit the ground. The rest of the soldiers faltered, unsure of where the shot had come from. Hawkins was already shifting his aim to the next target, his hands moving with precision and speed. His next shot took out another soldier, a clean hit to the chest. "Cover fire!" Hawkins shouted as he adjusted his position. His team responded immediately, opening fire on the advancing soldiers. The air was thick with the sound of blasters and the crack of Hawkins' rifle. The Empire soldiers were getting closer, but they weren't fast enough. They never had a chance. The battle was shifting now, the Empire's initial confidence giving way to panic as they realized they were being outmaneuvered. They had underestimated humanity, again. Hawkins could feel the tide turning. The Empire was no longer in control. His team, moving like a well-oiled machine, was systematically breaking down their defenses, taking out key targets with deadly accuracy. Another explosion rocked the battlefield as one of the Empire's transport vehicles was hit, sending soldiers flying through the air. The few remaining Empire soldiers had no clear direction, their morale shattered. Hawkins stood tall, surveying the battlefield through his scope, his eyes narrowing as he watched the remaining soldiers retreating. They had failed. The mission was a success. His calm buzzed in his ear. "Hawk, it's over. They're falling back." Hawkins didn't respond right away. He just kept watching, making sure there were no surprises left. The Empire had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. "Good work," he finally said, his voice low, but filled with approval. "Let's move. We've still got work to do." The ground trembled beneath Hawkins as the last of the Empire's forces scrambled to reorganize. The battle had shifted, but the full weight of the retaliation was about to come crashing down. Hawkins could feel the pulse of it, the tension in the air, the unmistakable pressure of a final stand. This was no longer about small skirmishes or outmaneuvering a scattered platoon. This was it. The last push. The Empire was sending its best. Through his scope, Hawkins saw the Empire's command center emerging on the horizon, a massive fortress surrounded by armored guards and advanced weaponry. A handful of elite soldiers, fully equipped with the latest tech and heavily armored suits, stood in the way of the final phase. But Hawkins wasn't worried. His team had already proven they could handle the impossible. His eyes narrowed as he focused on the approach of a squad of these elite soldiers, their black armor gleaming ominously in the dying light. There was a method to their movement, a chilling precision that reminded Hawkins of the cold efficiency he had seen from the Empire time and time again. But what they didn't understand was that human unpredictability, quick thinking, and relentless drive were their greatest weapon. Hawkins had already seen it unfold on the battlefield. This time, it was their turn to be surprised. "Hawk, we've got movement," came Miller's voice over the comm. "They're preparing to break through." Hawkins glanced at the approaching column of soldiers. The heavy boots of the elite soldiers hit the ground with a rhythmic thud. Each one of them was more than just a soldier, they were a living weapon, some of the Empire's finest. But Hawkins wasn't intimidated. He'd fought against far worse. And he had something they didn't: experience. He knew how to read a situation. How to manipulate the flow of combat. "I see them," Hawkins responded, his voice low, steady. "Stay in position. Don't fire until I give the word." The elite soldiers were getting closer. Hawkins could see their faces through the scopes of their weapons, determined, focused, unyielding. They weren't retreating. They were advancing with a sense of finality, as though they believed they could crush everything in their path. Hawkins could almost hear the arrogance in their movements. But their confidence was their weakness. He let the moment stretch, feeling the weight of it, the silence, the anticipation, the inevitable clash. The world around him seemed to hold its breath as the soldiers drew closer. Hawkins adjusted his rifle, ensuring everything was in perfect alignment. Then, without a second thought, he took the first shot. It was clean and precise, the bullet tearing through the air and striking one of the soldiers in the chest. The chaos erupted in an instant. The soldiers froze, their eyes darting to where the shot had come from. Hawkins had already shifted, moving silently into a new position, knowing that one shot wasn't enough to break their line. They would try to regroup. They would try to retaliate. That's when he would strike again. The rest of the elite soldiers took cover behind nearby structures, returning fire in a panicked burst of blaster shots that sent debris flying. Hawkins had already anticipated the shift. He squeezed the trigger again, and another soldier dropped, his body jerking as the bullet found its mark. "Move!" Hawkins barked into the comm, his voice a sharp command. "Take them down, now!" The rest of his team surged forward, the sound of gunfire and explosions filling the air. Miller and the others moved with deadly precision, pushing forward to neutralize the remaining Empire forces. They weren't giving them a chance to regroup. The Empire's elite soldiers fought back, but their attacks were frantic, uncoordinated, and desperate. Hawkins could see it in their eyes. They were on the edge, realizing that they were outmatched. But it wasn't over yet. There was one more obstacle to clear. The massive figure of General Trask appeared from the shadows, emerging from the command center. His towering presence was enough to make even the most seasoned soldiers pause. His face was a mask of fury and arrogance, his eyes narrowed as he took in the devastation around him. He was no longer content to hide behind his soldiers. It was time for the final confrontation. Hawkins could feel the tension in the air grow heavier as Trask approached, his steps deliberate, calculated. He was coming for the kill. "This ends now, human!" Trask's voice boomed over the battlefield, amplified by the speakers embedded in his armor. "You've made your point. But this is where it ends. You cannot defeat the Empire." Hawkins gripped his rifle tighter, his heart rate steady as he took aim. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. His actions would speak for him. "Not today, Trask," Hawkins muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. The general was close now, just within reach. Hawkins' finger hovered over the trigger, his breath slow and controlled. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when it would all come to an end. One shot. One final push. Trask raised his massive weapon, the barrel glowing with the intensity of energy being funneled into it. It was clear that he was prepared to take Hawkins down in a single, devastating strike. But Hawkins had already accounted for that. He was faster, more efficient. He had already learned the pattern, the rhythm of Trask's movements. As the general fired, Hawkins rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast as it obliterated the ground where he had been standing moments before. He had a fraction of a second. That was all he needed. His rifle was aimed, and Trask was exposed. The shot rang out. Trask's body jerked as the bullet struck him in the chest. His hand faltered, and the weapon he had been preparing to fire dropped to the ground. The general staggered back, shock spreading across his face. He couldn't comprehend it, not yet. He was supposed to be the one in control, the one who decided the fate of the battlefield. But in the end, he was just another soldier falling before the might of a human sniper. The Empire's forces, broken and shattered, retreated. Their leader, their final hope, was gone. The battle was over. Hawkins stood up, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of a soldier who had done his job. He surveyed the battlefield, the remnants of Empire soldiers scattered across the terrain, their once formidable forces reduced to nothing more than a failed attempt to crush the human rebellion. His team approached, gathering around him as the dust began to settle. Hawkins looked at them, their faces hard, resolute. "Good work," he said, his voice steady but filled with approval. "We've won today. But this isn't over." The Empire had been warned. And now they knew. Humans weren't just a nuisance. They were a force to be reckoned with.